Jessica Pegula has spent years competing against the best players in the world. She's faced powerful servers, relentless baseliners, and some of the cleanest ball strikers tennis has ever seen. So when a player like Pegula admits she can't fully understand what she's seeing, people pay attention. Recently, she made a statement that instantly caught the attention of the tennis world. According to Pegula, Jannik Sinner now has the most improved shot in all of tennis. She even admitted she doesn't completely understand how he transformed it so dramatically. That's a remarkable thing to hear about a player who's already sitting at the very top of the game. Because here's what many fans forget. Jannik Sinner wasn't born with this version of his game. When he first arrived on the ATP Tour, everyone noticed the same things. His timing was exceptional. His movement was effortless. His backhand looked world-class. But there was always one question surrounding him. Could his forehand ever become as dangerous as everything else? For years, analysts believed the forehand was good, just not terrifying. Under pressure, it occasionally broke down. Against elite defenders, it sometimes lacked the heavy penetration needed to finish points consistently. Meanwhile, rivals like Carlos Alcaraz were producing explosive winners from every corner of the court. Novak Djokovic could redirect pace almost effortlessly. Even Daniil Medvedev found ways to expose tiny weaknesses in long baseline exchanges. Sinner was already winning matches, but many experts believed he still hadn't unlocked his complete game. And that's exactly what makes today's conversation so fascinating. Because somewhere along the way, everything changed. Without making a huge announcement, without changing his personality, without creating unnecessary headlines, Jannik Sinner quietly built one of the most dangerous weapons in modern tennis. The scary part? Most people didn't even notice it happening. It wasn't one magical practice session. It wasn't one lucky tournament. It wasn't one coach suddenly fixing everything overnight. Instead, it happened little by little. One adjustment, one improvement, one tournament at a time, until suddenly, players standing across the net realized they were dealing with a completely different version of Jannik Sinner. His forehand wasn't simply faster. It became heavier, cleaner, more reliable, more unpredictable. The ball started exploding off his racket with incredible depth, forcing opponents further and further behind the baseline. Even when rivals expected the shot, they still struggled to control it. That's why Pegula's comment carries so much weight. Professional players notice details casual fans often miss. They don't judge shots by highlight reels. They judge them by what happens when they're standing on the opposite side of the court. They feel the pace. They read the spin. They experience the pressure. And when someone at Pegula's level openly says she can't explain how much one shot has improved, it tells you this isn't ordinary progress. It's something far bigger. But here's the real mystery. How did Jannik Sinner completely transform a shot that many people once considered his biggest weakness? Was it better coaching? A technical adjustment? A mental breakthrough? Or was there something happening behind the scenes that almost nobody noticed? Because if you rewind just a few seasons, the player dominating tennis today looked very different. And once you discover what actually changed, Pegula's reaction suddenly starts making perfect sense. If you ask most tennis fans when Jannik Sinner became unstoppable, they'll probably point to a Grand Slam title or a big victory over Novak Djokovic. But the real transformation started long before those headline moments. It began on the practice court. While fans were celebrating victories and debating rankings, Sinner and his team were quietly rebuilding one part of his game, his forehand. Not because it was bad, but because they believed it could become the best shot on the tour. For years, Sinner's forehand relied heavily on clean timing. When he had enough time, it looked incredible. But against the fastest players in the world, that extra split second often disappeared. The world's best defenders don't give you perfect positioning. They rush you. They force late contact. They make you hit uncomfortable balls over and over again. That was exactly where Sinner wanted to improve. Instead of chasing highlight winners, he focused on something much more important: consistency under pressure. His coaches worked on making the swing more repeatable, allowing him to strike the ball with the same confidence whether he was attacking, defending, or stretched wide. The result wasn't just more power. It was more control, more depth, more confidence. Suddenly, opponents weren't receiving a forehand they could eventually break down. They were receiving one that kept coming back with the same quality every single rally. And that's mentally exhausting, because in professional tennis, players aren't only fighting the ball. They're fighting doubt. The moment you realize your opponent's forehand isn't breaking down anymore, your entire strategy changes. You start taking bigger risks. You try lower percentage shots. You rush points that normally you'd build patiently. And that's exactly when mistakes begin. This wasn't simply about hitting harder. It was about taking time away from opponents. The improved forehand reached them quicker, pushed them deeper behind the baseline, and forced weaker replies. Instead of defending, Sinner started controlling rallies from the very first heavy forehand. That's one of the biggest reasons his entire game suddenly looked different. His backhand had always been elite. Now both wings were capable of hurting opponents. There was no obvious side to attack anymore. No comfortable pattern to expose. Every rally became dangerous. That's why Jessica Pegula's comment stood out. Professional players spend their lives studying technique. They notice tiny improvements that most viewers never see. When she said Sinner has the most improved shot in all of tennis, she wasn't talking about one spectacular winner. She was talking about hundreds of hours of invisible work that completely changed how his game functions. And perhaps the most impressive part, Sinner never made a big deal about it. No bold promises. No dramatic interviews. No claims that he had discovered some secret formula. He simply kept improving until everyone else started noticing. But if the forehand had become this dangerous, the next question became even more interesting. Why couldn't anyone stop it? Because once Sinner started trusting that shot under pressure, it didn't just win him points. It began changing the outcome of the biggest matches of his career. For a while, the improvement went almost unnoticed. Fans saw Jannik Sinner winning more matches. Commentators praised his confidence. The rankings kept climbing. But the biggest clue wasn't in the statistics. It was in the reactions of the players standing across the net. Suddenly, rallies that used to be balanced were ending much sooner. Opponents weren't losing because Sinner was taking wild risks. They were losing because he was controlling every exchange with one simple weapon, his forehand. Every heavy forehand pushed them a step farther behind the baseline. Every deep shot stole a little more time. And in professional tennis, time is everything. When you're constantly forced to hit while moving backwards, you stop dictating points. You start surviving them. That's exactly what happened against many of the tour's best players. Instead of waiting for short balls, Sinner began creating them. Instead of reacting, he started forcing reactions. That small change completely transformed the rhythm of his matches. His opponents suddenly had a difficult choice. Attack first, or let Sinner attack. Neither option felt comfortable. Because once Sinner landed that first heavy forehand, the point usually shifted in his favor. The pressure became relentless. What's fascinating is that this improvement didn't make his game flashy. It made it efficient. You'll rarely see him celebrating after every winner. You'll rarely see unnecessary emotion. He simply walks back to the baseline, hits another heavy forehand, wins another point, and repeats the process. That's one of the reasons his game has become so difficult to stop. His consistency creates pressure long before the scoreboard does. Then came the biggest stages. The deeper Sinner went in Grand Slams, the more obvious the transformation became. Against elite competition, there was no visible weakness to target anymore. His backhand remained one of the cleanest on tour. His movement continued improving. His serve became more reliable. And now, the forehand had joined the list of elite weapons. That's a nightmare for any opponent. Because tennis is often about finding one area you can repeatedly attack. Against Sinner, that option slowly disappeared. Even players known for incredible defense found themselves struggling to absorb the pace. The ball wasn't just fast. It was arriving deep with purpose, forcing uncomfortable contact again and again. That's why Jessica Pegula's words matter so much. When a fellow professional says she can't understand how dramatically a shot has improved, she's recognizing something players feel before fans fully notice it. The shot isn't dangerous because it looks spectacular. It's dangerous because it keeps producing the same quality under pressure. Champions aren't built on impossible winners. They're built on repeatable excellence. And that's exactly what Sinner has created. His forehand is no longer just another shot in his arsenal. It's the shot that allows everything else in his game to work. It opens the court, creates shorter replies. It gives him control of rallies before opponents can settle. In many ways, it's become the foundation of his success. But perhaps the most impressive part isn't that Sinner improved. Every professional player works to improve. The real difference is how quickly he turned that improvement into victories against the very best in the world. And once that started happening, the conversation changed completely. People stopped asking whether Jannik Sinner could become a champion. Instead, they started asking a much bigger question. Has tennis just witnessed the arrival of its next dominant force? There was a time when coaches believed the best way to beat Jannik Sinner was simple. Extend the rallies. Target his forehand under pressure. Wait for the mistake. For a while, that strategy actually worked. But today, that same game plan can do exactly the opposite. Instead of breaking Sinner's forehand, opponents often find themselves being broken by it. And that's the biggest reason Jessica Pegula's comment has attracted so much attention. She wasn't talking about a lucky tournament. She wasn't talking about one incredible match. She was talking about a transformation that every professional player has started to notice. Because once Sinner's forehand reached this level, everything around it became even more dangerous. His serve suddenly became more valuable. Why? Because one strong serve often sets up the first forehand. And when that first forehand lands deep with pace, the rally immediately shifts in Sinner's favor. Then comes another problem. His movement. Unlike many power hitters, Sinner doesn't need to stop and plant his feet before attacking. He can strike aggressively while moving, sliding, or recovering. That makes his forehand even harder to predict. One moment it looks like he's defending, the next second he's completely flipped the point around. That's why opponents are finding it harder than ever to settle into a rhythm. Every rally feels like it's balanced, until suddenly, one forehand changes everything. You don't always notice it while watching live, but players feel it instantly. They're pushed a little deeper, forced a little wider, given a little less time. And against the world's best players, those tiny differences decide matches. It's no surprise that many analysts now describe Sinner as one of the cleanest ball strikers on tour. Not because he plays the flashiest tennis, but because his technique holds up under the biggest pressure. Whether it's an early round match or a Grand Slam showdown, the quality of that forehand barely drops. That's incredibly rare. Most players have a level they struggle to maintain. Sinner's level has become remarkably consistent. And consistency is what wins championships. That's also why the conversation around him has completely changed. People are no longer asking if he belongs among the elite. They're asking who can consistently stop him. Because when a player combines elite movement, a world-class backhand, a reliable serve, and now a forehand that even fellow professionals struggle to explain, you're no longer looking at a rising star. You're looking at a complete player. A player with very few obvious weaknesses. And perhaps that's the biggest compliment hidden inside Jessica Pegula's words. She didn't simply praise Sinner. She highlighted the amount of work it takes to transform a shot at the highest level of tennis. Millions of fans only see the final result. The trophy, the rankings, the highlights. What they don't see are the thousands of forehands hit in empty practice courts, the endless technical adjustments, the constant search for tiny improvements that eventually become game-changing weapons. That's the part most people never witness. And maybe that's exactly why Jannik Sinner's forehand feels so mysterious today. Because while everyone else was watching the matches, he was quietly building a weapon that has started changing the future of men's tennis. In tennis, every generation eventually reaches the same moment. A player stops being viewed as a talented contender and starts being viewed as the standard everyone else has to chase. For Jannik Sinner, that moment may have already arrived. Not because he suddenly became faster. Not because he suddenly started serving 20 aces every match. But because he solved one of the biggest questions surrounding his game. His forehand. For years, it was discussed as the shot that still had room to grow. Today, it's being described by fellow professionals as the most improved shot in all of tennis. That's an incredible transformation. And perhaps the most impressive part is that Sinner never tried to convince people with words. He let the results do the talking. Every tournament, every big match, every pressure point, his forehand continued delivering. That's why Jessica Pegula's reaction feels so important. She wasn't trying to create headlines. She wasn't exaggerating to praise another player. She simply admitted what many professionals have already started seeing. Sometimes, when you're competing against the very best in the world, you immediately recognize when something has reached another level. And for Pegula, Sinner's forehand is exactly that. A shot she openly admitted she still can't fully explain. That tells you everything about how much respect this weapon has earned across the tennis world. But maybe the real lesson isn't about one forehand. It's about the mindset behind it. Most players reach the top and focus on protecting their level. Sinner chose a different path. He kept searching for weaknesses. He kept refining details. He kept improving areas that many people already considered good enough. That's the mentality that separates champions from future legends. Because the most dangerous athletes aren't the ones with perfect talent. They're the ones who refuse to stop evolving. And that's exactly what we've witnessed. The forehand didn't become elite overnight. It became elite because thousands of invisible repetitions eventually showed up under the brightest lights in tennis. Today, opponents don't just prepare for Jannik Sinner. They prepare for a player with almost no obvious weakness. A player who can dominate from either wing. A player who stays calm when the pressure rises. And now, a player whose biggest improvement has become one of the biggest talking points in the sport. The scary part? Sinner is still in the prime years of his career. If this version of his forehand continues to develop, the rest of the ATP Tour may face an even bigger challenge in the years ahead. Because once a player discovers a weapon that changes matches, confidence follows, victories follow, and sometimes, an entire era begins. So maybe Jessica Pegula wasn't simply complimenting Jannik Sinner. Maybe she was recognizing something much bigger. The moment an already world-class player found the missing piece that could define his legacy. And if she's right, the tennis world may have only seen the beginning of what Jannik Sinner is capable of.